In this video, we are going to be learning about factoring trinomials. And a key here is that when we factor a trinomial, we want to look for two integers that multiply to c and add up to b. So if we look at our x squared plus bx plus c, that's where we're getting these c's and b's from. So we're looking for numbers that will multiply to c, and those same numbers will add up to b. Alright, so for our first example, we have x squared plus 7x plus 12. So we are looking for two numbers that we can multiply together to get 12, and we can also add them together to get 7. So if I think through my factors of 12, I can think of 6 and 2. Those are factors of 12, but if I add those together, I'm just going to get 8. So let's try another one. If I think of 4 and 3, those are factors of 12, and then I can also add those together to get 7. So what we're going to do here is we're going to write our parentheses. We're going to put our x terms in our first terms here, because x times x is x squared. And then we're going to think through our factors of 12. So we said 3 and 4 work. Now you're going to want to do this work with a pencil. So if I put a 3 and a 4 here, I'm going to say, alright, I know I can multiply those two, and I'm going to get 12. And see, I want my constant on the end to be 12. Now, if I make both of these positive, that means when I add together, when I do FOIL, a 4x and a 3x, I'm going to get 7x. So my answer to this problem, factoring this trinomial, is x plus 3 times x plus 4. But I'm going to check myself by doing FOIL. So if I take my first terms, I have x times x, I'm going to have x squared. If I take my outside terms, I'm going to have x times 4 is 4x. And then when I take my inside terms, I have 3x. And when I take my last terms, I have 3 times 4 is 12. So when I simplify this, I end up with x squared plus 7x plus 12, which is what I started with. Okay, let's do another one. I think the best way to learn this is just to start doing problems. So number 2. Again, I'm going to set this up where I have my parentheses already, and I'm going to put my n's here because I know that when I do that FOIL, my first terms are going to multiply to get n squared. Now I need to think of two numbers I can multiply to get 20. And I can also add those same numbers together to get 9. So I'm thinking 5 and 4 look like good options here. So I'm going to put a 4 here, and I'm going to put a 5 there. And because I want this to be a positive 20, I'm going to need a positive here and a positive there. And then when I add these numbers together, I'm going to get a positive 9. So let's check it. If I do the FOIL, I'm going to take my first terms here, and I'm going to get n squared. Then I'm going to take my outside terms and get 5n, my inside terms and get 4n, and my last terms, and I get 20. When I simplify, I have n squared plus 9n plus 20, and that's what I started with. Okay, let's try another one. Here I have h's I'm dealing with, so I am going to set this first term as h and that one as h because I know h times h is going to give me h squared. And then I have an 18, so I want to think through what can I multiply together to get 18, and I can also add those numbers to get 9. So I think, alright, well I have 9 times 2, that'll give me 18, but when I add those together, I'm not going to get 9, so I need to try another one. So what about 3 and 6? So if I have a 3 and a 6 here, that means I need a positive 18, so I'm going to make both of these positive, and that's going to work out that when I add these two together, when I multiply and FOIL, I'm going to end up with a 9h. And the reason why I said to make sure you're using a pencil and make sure you have an eraser is that sometimes you're going to have to kind of just guess at what these numbers are and then do FOIL to see if you're right. So let's do FOIL here. So I have my first terms, so that's h squared, and then I have my outside terms, so that's 6h, and then I do my inside, that's 3h, and then my last is 18. And when I simplify that, I have h squared plus 9h plus 18, and that is what I started with. Okay, let's do one more. Here I have a's. I'm going to start off by putting an a here and an a there. I want two numbers that I can add together and, that I can multiply together and get 24, and then when I add them, I can get 10. So 6 and 4 seem like good bets to start with. So I need to have a positive 24, so I'm going to put positives there. And when I do my FOIL, I'm going to have a squared plus 4a, and then I'm going to do my inside, which is 6a, and then my last is 24. And when I simplify that, I have a squared plus 10a plus 24. Alright, so I would like for you to try number 5 and 6 right now and see if you can do those on your own, and pause the video, and then I'm going to show you the answers to that. So there are your answers to 5 and 6, and with number 6, if we have y plus 1 times y plus 1, we can write that as y plus 1 squared. Now, number 7, we are starting with a little bit more complexity. If you noticed, all these that we did for 1 through 6, they had just pluses. We had positives in between all of our terms. But we also have to know how to deal with it when we have a negative here right before this third term. But the process is still the same, but we just have to think through negative numbers now. So let's do the same thing here. For number 7, we have our n and our n. That gives us n squared. Now I need to think through, again, what two numbers can I multiply to get 18? But then when I'm getting negative 18, I should say, and then when I add them together, I need to end up with a positive 3. Alright, so let's think through. If I have 6 times 3, I know that's 18, but I need this number to be negative. So if I do a negative 3 and a positive 6, then when I add those two together, I'm going to get 3n. So again, some of this you're just going to have trial and error. If you do a 6 and a 3 here, that gives me the number for 18. And I'm going to make this one a negative and this one a positive. So now I can see I have 6 times negative 3, which is negative 18, and a 6n minus a 3n will give me 3n. So that looks like the right answer, but let's go ahead and do the entire FOIL. So I have n times n, it's going to be n squared. Then for my outside, I have a negative 3n, and don't forget that negative, and then I have a positive 6n, and then 6 times negative 3 is negative 18. And now I'm going to simplify, so that gives me n squared. Now this negative 3n plus 6n is going to be a positive 3n, and then I just have the negative 18. Okay, let's do another one. So I'm going to set up again here. I've got my x term here, my x term here. Now I'm thinking through, what can I multiply to get negative 8? And then I also need to add those numbers together to get a positive 2. So I know 4 times negative 2 is negative 8. And then I have to think through, well, if my 4 is positive and my 2 is negative, then 4 minus 2 will give me 2. So let's try that. I'm going to put my 4 and 2 in here, and I'm going to make my 4 positive, and I'm going to make my 2 a negative. So when I do my FOIL, I end up with x squared, and then I'm going to have a negative 2x, a positive 4x, and a negative 8. So I can see here that this is going to simplify to just what we wanted to have. And we see that 4x minus 2x gives us that 2x. And then we have a negative 8 as our constant. So we're going to continue on. We still have this negative sitting in that position right before that third term. So for number 9, I am again going to set up with my g's here. And then I need to think through what can I multiply together to get negative 10. And when I add those numbers together, I'm going to get 3. Well, 5 and 2 are looking pretty good for the numbers that I'm going to use. And so then I want to think, well, if I want to end up with a positive 3, it would make sense to do a positive 5 and a negative 2. So if I have 5 times negative 2, that gives me negative 10. 5g minus a 2g is 3g. And then if I go through and I do my FOIL again, you're going to end up with g squared plus 3g minus 10. All right, and then number 10, here we have a little bit bigger number, but that's totally fine. So I'm going to set up here with my s, and I need to think through my factors of 54. So 9 and 6, 9 times 6 is 54, and I need to be negative, so either the 9 or the 6 needs to be negative. Well, I know if I need to end up adding those numbers together and getting a positive 3, it's probably going to be more likely that I'm going to have a positive 9 and a negative 6. So when I multiply the 9 times negative 6, I get negative 54. When I have 9s minus 6x, I get 3s. And if I do my FOIL, I'm going to see that I end up with s squared plus 3s minus 24. I'd like for you to try 11 through 14 and pause the video, and then you can check your work. Okay, so here are the answers to 11 to 14. Now we're going to throw another kind of wrinkle into the situation. With this one, we have 2 negatives here. So the process is still the same, but again, we need to take into consideration our negatives. So I am going to put my b terms here. I want to think through what can I multiply together to get negative 63. Well, I know that 9 and 7 are going to multiply to get 63, but one of those needs to be a negative so that I get a negative 63. Now, when I add the two numbers together, I also want to have a negative. So it's going to make more sense. I'm going to put my 9 and 7 here. I'm going to try first to put the larger number as negative and the smaller number as positive, because then when I take a negative 9b and I add 7b to that, I get negative 2b. And negative 9 times 7 is negative 63, which is where I get that negative 63. Alright, for this one, I'm going to again set up with my a's. Now I want to multiply two numbers together to get 3. So 3 and 1 look like they're going to be my options, but I need it to be a negative 3. And then when I add those two numbers, that 3 and 1, whichever one I make negative, I need to end up with a negative 2 when I add them together. So again, I'm going to have my negative number be the larger one, because when I take negative 3a and I add it to 1a, I'm going to get negative 2a, and negative 3 times 1 is negative 3. Alright, for number 17, we have k's, so I'm going to put k in both of those first positions. Now I need to think through 64. So the first thing that comes to my mind is 8 and 8, 8 times 8. But if I put 8 and 8 in there, then let's see, is that going to work? Well, I need these things to add up somehow to get to 12, and I don't see how that's going to work. So I'm just going to erase it, and you're probably going to do a lot of erasing when you're factoring this trinomials, and I'm going to think of another one. What about 16 and 4? That looks promising because I need to get to a 12. I know 16 minus 4 is 12, but the answer needs to be a negative 12. So I'm going to put my 16 and my 4 in here, and then I'm going to think through. Well, my larger number, 16, should be negative, right? Because I want to take a negative 16k, and then I'm going to make this positive and get a negative 12k. And negative 16 times 4 is negative 64. And if you do FOIL, you will get back to the same answer. And then this 18, I am going to set up with my x's. Two things that I can multiply together to get 72 would be 18 and 4. And that looks good because I want to somehow get to 14. I need that 14 to be negative though. So, and because it's a negative 72, I need one of either the 18 or the 14 to be negative as well. So if we do a negative 18 and we add 4 to it, that's going to get us to that negative 14 there. On the back side, I would like for you to do 19 through 24 and then come and bring those to class to be checked. And then 25 through 30 are optional. Obviously, the more practice you do, the better you're going to be at the skill. So we'll have the answers for 25 to 30 as well. The last thing we're going to talk about is multi-step factoring. And here we're basically going to look for a greatest common factor first before factoring the trinomial. And that really is just going to make the factoring process easier. So for 31 here, I want to look for a number that I could factor out of 4, 12, and 8. Well, I think 4 would be a good one. So I'm going to factor out that 4. And when I do that, I'm left with n squared plus 3n plus 2. Now, with this trinomial here, I'm going to use the same skill we just learned, where I'm going to set up my n's in my first positions. I'm going to say, okay, what can I multiply to get 2? Well, 2 and 1 are going to be my options. And then I need to add these together to get 3, so they both need to be positive. And now this would be our most simplified form. Same thing for this one. I have a 2, a negative 8, and a 24. I want to think of a greatest common factor, and 2 is going to work for that. 2 divides into all of those. So I have 2, and then I have in my parentheses x squared minus 4x minus 12. And then I'm going to take and factor this trinomial the way we have been doing. So I've got my x's there. Now I have a negative 12 is what I'm looking at here. So I think that 6 and 2 are going to be good options because I think I can make that work to get a negative 4 out of that. So I'm going to put my 6 and my 2 here. And I want to have my larger number the negative. So negative 6 plus 2 is going to give me negative 4, and then negative 6 times 2 is negative 12. I would like for you to go ahead and do 33 and 34, and then 35 and 36 are going to be optional. So make sure that you complete the problems. That's the best way to figure out if you understand the concept, and when you come to class we will get them all checked.